Okay. Patrick Wilson is the oldest sibling of three in our family. So my oldest brother, he was the first of the three. It's kind of weird, but it's fine. He was the first of the three of us. So between me and my other brother, Dan, to go to college and to pick a major, he picked computer science, even though both of our parents were teachers, although we do have some engineers in the extended family. At the time, computer science seemed to be quite a hot and emerging major. And so he was kind of a trailblazer for Dan and I, studying at the University of Michigan and going on to get his master's in computer science there. Since three of us were responsible for financing college, he also managed to get some really powerful scholarships that allowed him to graduate his undergrad degree debt-free, which is pretty incredible. After finishing his master's, during which he also worked as a teacher's assistant for some intro coding classes at Umich, he moved to San Francisco for his first job as a software engineer at Pocket Gems, a video game company, having already also had internships for companies including Yahoo, Twilio, and Cisco by then. He worked at Pocket Gems for about 2 years before moving to a company that creates trucking software called Samsara. During the pandemic, he was laid off due to budget cuts, then was reached out to about a role for a new startup called Toro TMS. Since accepting that job over 3 years ago, he has naturally transitioned into a senior product manager role and found great personal growth through the challenges presented in his responsibilities. He's also found much more momentum in doing what he does now compared to when he was a software engineer. On top of all this, he and his girlfriend have been getting into the real estate game in recent years in an attempt to generate passive income and move towards financial freedom. If it is not already quite obvious, the man loves to stay busy, but let's also just point out his main hobby, which is cycling. In his free time, Patrick can be found cycling the roads of Michigan where he currently lives and blocking off most future weekends for various cycling races around the country and at this point, world, as he is headed to a trip sponsored by the biking company Truck in Majorca pretty soon here. Personally, I'm thrilled for this episode because I think both of my brothers have played a pivotal role in where I am today, being a data engineer and all. They have always provided endless support and encouragement in all of my endeavors, and I think that has provided an environment for me to not fear failure as much and just go for everything I want in life. Okay, let's get into it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. That was a long intro, but now I can jump right into questions on everything I mentioned, because I think diving deep into your experiences would be relevant to a lot of people starting out in their careers or going through a career transition, and then all your other endeavors on the side, like the real estate and the cycling. Yeah, I think it's going to be very relevant to people in their 20s or anyone else. So first, I would love to ask you about if you could give me your opinion on what happened when you were picking a major, your decision. And the reason I put such an emphasis on this is because while some people say that what you choose to study in college has no real effect on where you end up or something to that degree, retrospectively in life, I do think it has played a big role in the jobs that you had and where you lived and everything else. So I just am really curious how you came to choose computer science, not really having anyone in the family who was paving that path for you.
Yeah, it's not going to be any kind of stroke of genius or anything like that. I think of a lot of the decisions I've made as fortunate coincidences, probably more so than really intentional, groundbreaking moments of clarity. But I mean, when I think back to my whole college story, a lot of the themes you shared about your own journey were the same for me. I was looking at the financial aspect pretty forefront. I actually remember when I first picked Michigan, I was kind of looking at the total cost, what the program's rankings were, without even really understanding why or what those jobs actually looked like. And then there was an aspect of social where it was, could I go see college game days and do that? And so in the end, Michigan was, given that we were in state, it was actually an economical decision. It was going to be cheaper than Michigan State, where we were raised to love as Spartans in that. And it was going to be on paper, better rankings programs. And then I think I had a good friend one year, I had Josh, who had just gone to Michigan and was saying good things. So it was like, it was easy. It was not a super thoughtful thing. And when I then got into the College of Engineering, I'm kind of going through these intro classes. First one of them that everybody took was Intro to Coding, Engineering 101. And I liked that it was attainable. Like you could go sit down and make a project just yourself and understand every aspect of it. When I looked at like a mechanical engineering or chemical, it all felt very abstract, even though that was purely just because I wasn't exposed to it. I think more so than that is what it has to be. So anyways, I remember thinking none of these other types of engineering resonate with me. Mobile phones were like blowing up. Like I think the iPhone had been out for a year or two. And so I was like, this seems fun because I could show things to my friends that I made, and I liked the teacher. And so it was really like just listening to that signal. And I had my freshman year and I said, okay, let's keep exploring it. And then that sort of leads one thing after another. And I do think though that I wasn't making these decisions on an island, like even though maybe our family wasn't engineering or anything like that, like the community, being on campus with other like-minded folks who maybe had a stronger family motivated drive. I was sort of just around those types of things. Like you meet a lot of people in college who do understand what those careers look like, and you can kind of pick up and latch onto that energy like by proxy.
Yeah, I remember like just me and Dan, I think just watching you have, I think by the time I was around at least, like there was definitely momentum with both you and Dan. Like you had gotten jobs in the fields and like just saw how many opportunities there were. So it seemed like a really, really good decision. So that's why I'm just curious, but it's nice to know that like it wasn't like super well thought out. It just kind of was natural for you. But thinking back even, so you were in the College of Engineering at that point then, like you started in that, and that was what, like around 2013 you said, like,
Yeah, 2011, fall of 2011 was my freshman year. Yeah.
okay, Instagram was like the moment.
Probably more so Facebook still at that time than pure Instagram. Although maybe now that I'm remembering, certain apps that helped you with filters were just exploding. Yeah. So maybe that was Instagram. Does
Okay.
sound about right. But yeah, to that point, just apps were kind of silly. Nothing was like super tuned to be addictive. I mean, Facebook probably still to a certain extent, but things were very much like the beauty of just creating something. And so we had that culture of hackathons, and it was like, what can you even create?
Yeah.
And I think when you apply to school with financial aid, part of what they'll offer you is called work study, which they'll kind of hook you up with a potential job opportunity close to minimum wage, but you get engineering experience or something. And mine was like an experimental course in mobile app development where we just got to like build things and collect like a minimum wage. It was sort of built under research. And so that was like, that kind of piqued me onto it as well, my freshman.
Yeah, it was such a good time, like looking back, because it was also new. And I feel like there was more like instant gratification with the app development and everything. I don't know. It just seemed like a really hot time. But going back even further, why do you think you chose engineering?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can look at it from the lens of like safety. I definitely wanted to realize some financial security. You could look at it from like creating and creativity. I think I've always liked making music, coming up with games or ideas, businesses. And I liked how close it was to, you can just go out and create something that you have an idea for without any other help. It just felt like with music, you go and you sit down and you can just start to build a sound and build a composition just right with a toolkit. Everything else that was being built was websites or that. And so that was the toolkit for real life things in my head. And then in school, I seemed to, my default mode was more logical, more calculating. And so I gravitated to engineering, just like the guidance counselors will route you a certain way. Our dad's a math teacher, as you know. So there was some of that going on. You look at you don't know about what hardly any of these careers are. And so when in doubt, just go off the information you have and play the odds. I think there's a part of me that was like, I don't have to pick a specific industry if I do coding. I could nudge like medicine or sports or hip hop. It's like in theory, you could kind of see the stories being there playing out. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like back when I was in high school, I was literally at the point where I would make decisions. I would let adults' expressions when I would float an idea to them control whether or not I thought that was a good idea. So if I would say engineering, for example, a lot of adults would be like, oh, it's a good idea. Like aunts and uncles, guidance counselor, parents, grandparents, friends, parents, but if I would say versus something else, for example, I don't have a great example right now, but I liked that positive validation I got from oh, engineering's stable. That's a good way to go. So just back then, going off the information you had, it's really hard to know what you're getting into. It's how do you know? I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't think I even realized how future proof it was going to be relative to other things. I don't know that was that clear necessarily. Maybe that sort of contributed to the buzz it had around campus or whatever, but I definitely didn't have that figured out. And probably don't need to get into the details, but even just completing a degree was rockier. I sort of switched majors midway through. I encountered frustration and all those sorts of same things you've shared about your story. So it wasn't necessarily smooth sailing from then on out, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I think also back then didn't know enough to the point where I would take that the major was difficult as a sign that it was going to pay dividends. I was like, oh, if this is hard, it must be worth something. But in reality, I don't think that's the best logic to apply to life. Yeah, it's just, I think it's in the same vein as you're young, maybe more naive, taking the info that you have and going off of that. So I also really want to get this info from you for others that I think would be really helpful. And that is, I always really admired you for getting all those scholarships that really put you in a good financial position once you graduated. And I think when I was in college, I would make excuses to myself 'cause I didn't get similar scholarships and ended up with some pretty sizable loans, but I would make excuses to myself oh, you had really good grades starting out, so that helped a lot with getting scholarships, and oh, I don't have that, so it'll be harder for me or whatever, or the scholarships you got were super rare. But the more I've reflected on it, I think I just didn't think I could, so I didn't try. And I think you were really, really good about applying to lots of things and just seeing what was available. So I wanted to ask if you had advice for anyone who's maybe going through that. They're anxious about financial situation when going into college and maybe thinking about what scholarships might be available, just how you handled all of that. Because I think it's a lot for someone that age to handle. You were managing what the college was charging you, and then these other scholarships where you have to correspond with people and keep your grades up and everything. So yeah.
Yeah. The shots on goal thing is definitely real. If you look at the time it takes you to put one of these submissions in versus what it could potentially do for you, it's really hard not to see how worth it is relative to other things. Like some of these scholarships are like worldwide or nationwide through like Walmart or something. It's almost like a faceless entity. I mean, obviously I'm extremely grateful, but like the way you interface with it is that way. If you submit something online, might pay you like $2,000 or something. It's like, what else could you be doing that has a, $100,000 an hour return on time? Not much as a high schooler. So yeah, I mean, I think there is that aspect of it. And at that time, I think I might have gotten like some positive reinforcement from like mom or a guidance counselor or something about just continuing to shoot those out. I was also fairly nervous about taking out like the big student loans. It was just such a foreign concept that I didn't understand. I think if I understood lending and like what the career path might actually look like, maybe I wouldn't have gone as hard on them. But honestly, I was so like, I wasn't even thinking about loans as an option. I was like, I can't let that balance run out. That was like my mindset, if I remember correctly. But as far as like how you choose to portray yourself, just so happened that I was more of like a well-rounded applicant versus maybe some other people are looking for like a very unique person spiking on certain dimensions. So that was like my package that I tried to communicate. And I think it's important when you think about like, it's just so rare to think this way as like a high schooler or even whatever. But as my role has sort of shifted away from coding, I'm doing a lot of time thinking about like selling and thinking about like, what are the motivations of people? Like when you're in high school, like you said, you're not even having like real conversations. Like you're professionally, like your college essays are like, we're told a good college essay is like talking about these concepts of like, oh, I want to go out and collaborate. Like there are all these kinds of nebulous concepts that I don't think, at least I didn't really understand. I was just sort of pattern matching. Like, okay, that's a good sentence. That's a good concept. So I don't know. I mean, if a young person was tackling it now, and forget what like the question is. Think about like what might the motivation of this organization be? What would stand out? What a lot of people talk about, you're going to find your most success not in the single category that you really like, but probably the intersection of a couple things that you're decent at. You combine all those together and then you are authentically the best combination of those things. So look for moments where you can communicate something like that. So I don't know, I'd probably do it a little bit differently if I did it over as far as how you pitch yourself. But the overwhelming things like numbers game, just get yourself out there. And if you're not that person with high grades and whatever, honor roll, cool. I don't think many boards these days are trying to pack their recipients with only those type of people. It's like an investment. You want to hedge your bets and have a variety of people.
Yeah.
So just think about what it is that makes you you and then try and match that up to what someone might be looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is really good that you were well-rounded, extremely well-rounded. Like you weren't just like hard into computer science. Like you were in like drumming band, the drumming group and so many other stuff. What other stuff were you involved in college?
Yeah, I did this percussion performance group. That was like Blue Man group. I did just whatever else, intramurals, worked, did internships.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely.
We do the hackathons. Towards the end, I was trying to create startups and things like that. Yeah, I don't know. Just a variety of things.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's really great advice. And oh, it made me think like another thing I wish I had done is just talk to more people, ask more people for help. I feel like I'm just starting to realize that that is a free way to learn more, diversify your skills, grow your network. I feel like back then, for whatever reason, I was like allergic to the concept of networking. I thought that was like so bad just because of what I thought it was. But that's a great way as well. I guess not only with looking for scholarships, but like just getting context on like what you're doing and like, what
Mm.
you want to do. Like, I just wish I had done that. And I feel like you were good about that. Like just having those
Well,
conversations.
I've always been a little timid to go out and spin up a conversation from nothing, but I have had the ability to hold friendships with all sorts of different type of people. So I agree with you that I would love to have done that first part more, where you aren't embarrassed or afraid to like talk to anyone or ask what you might think is a dumb question, like that kind of stuff. Absolutely, that can hold you back if you're really worried and self-conscious about that stuff. Also, a lot of the most interesting relationships, things, they all come from taking those risks. But yeah, maybe the well-roundedness came as a side effect from just having spent time in like, a lot of different types of rooms, the band room, the basketball locker room, the musical, the whatever, adult circles, big kids, just obviously still many, many more to enter, of course, but I do like that way of living. I think that's something I like to protect and catch myself if I'm like, I actually just, it's rare that I see a conversation that I don't find something interesting about, I guess.
I think that's a great quality. But yeah, it sounds like you never want to be too siloed in like your life. But now I would really love to ask you about once you got into industry with your software engineer roles at Samsara and Pocket Gems. Just like, what were you looking for at the time? How did you approach it? What did you learn while you were in those roles? Like, now that you are where you are, it's been years since then. Yeah, what's your general reflection on that time? I guess that 3-year period of your life when you were just a software engineer in industry after completing your master's.
Yeah, the internships gave a preview. I think it was not so obvious what a full-time gig was going to look like, because a lot of these coding internships are sort of dressed up with fun and with like, you almost can't get into too much mischief. You can't build up too much responsibility in that small amount of time, especially if you aren't looking for it. And I think my approach early on was, what is possible? What are my options? Again, I was playing the numbers game. I would apply to any and everything. For my very first internship, I think my options were Walmart in Arkansas, and I was about ready to ship off to there. And then this opportunity at Cisco in North Carolina came, and I remember evaluating, I was like, I think North Carolina would be a little bit more fun, and it paid like $2 an hour more. And it's no more as a tech company, whereas now I know Walmart especially in the supply chain, does a lot of very like best in class things. But at that time, I was like, I kind of want to be more of a tech company. So I certainly wasn't looking for Cisco early on. I was just looking for something that was an internship. And then as it got time to like picking a starting point, I mean, honestly, my story was I joined a local tech startup that I started working at as I was approaching the end of college. And that at the last second, that startup dissolved and got acquired And that left me, like everyone else had lined up their post-graduation jobs. And that left me like square one, which is still a very fun, very cool experience there. And so I just again went back to the drawing board and just said, what are the options? I ended up at a phone video game company for my first gig. And part of it was San Francisco, just getting out there. I was a little familiar with it. Part of it was they responded to my application. And, part of it was I could find a way to get excited about the opportunity. And then you're there and in my case, there were moments where I felt like I really belonged and I was excited. And I think when you feel that excitement, that's the kind of stuff that makes you feel like you made the right decision. And when you feel indifference, that's scary because you start to get desensitized to it. And you're like, well, this is just work. But maybe it's more about your fit with the work than it just being work in general. So my story at Pocket Gems was I spent a year there. I don't really have any semblance of like a mentor necessarily. So I'm just piecing together my own map. I have plenty of good coworkers, very fun work environment, everything like that. And then I'm starting to feel a little bit just indifferent. And I'm like, well, I need to inject some change into this. What else is out there? Again, a very similar search where I said anything's on the table. End up at this other company, more of a growing company, which is at that point something I was looking for as opposed to one that's just even sailing, trying to find their way. And I end up there, and then a year goes by, and I sort of, you had a gracious way of saying it in the intro, as far as what you say, a financial layoff. But, at the end of the day, I think there's a reason why I was someone laid off and not, the guy or woman to the left of me and right of me. So,
I mean, to quickly interject, I do want to finish. Like, that was right at the beginning of COVID. Now, having seen all these layoffs over the past 3 years, do you view that differently with like less maybe like blame on yourself or like, oh, it was due to skill or like, do you view it differently?
well, I think, yeah, I mean, at the time, I think I didn't, not even blame, but I think I truly was like, well, that's COVID. I'm new. Having now the lens of being part of a startup and seeing, what kind of conversation leaders are having, candid conversation about what needs to be done, in my own clarity of knowing what I was doing, I think I see it more clearly now. And it's not that I blame myself, but yeah, if I'm in charge of finding the cut in the budget, like it made sense for that to be me. And I don't view it as like a failure or something that weakens my confidence. I think I was making, at that point, unknowing, but I was certainly making decisions, unconscious decisions to not be doing what I could. And so I don't think of it as I'm not built to handle this. I think of it more like I'm grateful for learning the lesson early-ish in my career.
Wait,
And as far as the lesson, which is, if you're in a seat where you are not empowered to not solve problems in the way that energizes you, or, you don't particularly care deeply about what you're doing, that's just a different recipe. And that could be a preferred recipe for certain people or certain moments in life, but you should know that you're making that decision and it's going to have these trade-offs, as opposed to just like doing everything unknowing and just being like, well, I don't know what's going on, but this is my situation. So I think now I can say like, oh, that's on the table if I want to go somewhere and just kind of be on cruise control and doing that. But, we'll get into my experience after that. But knowing now that there are other recipes at this moment, that's not the one. I'm glad that they forced me to realize that as opposed to me taking a lot longer to figure it out myself.
Yeah, that's really good perspective. And as you're talking about it, I'm thinking treating the symptom versus understanding the cause. So when you were let go, maybe I'm thinking if it were me, my initial reaction might be like, oh, and even now, when I feel like I'm not performing up to par, I'm not passionate about my work or whatever, it's very easy to be like, I'm not good enough. I like imposter syndrome. I'm not trying hard enough. But sometimes it's like, well, are you in a position where you want to try? Like, are there other parts existing in your role that are empowering you or putting you in an environment where you're set up to do your best and learn and grow? Like, it's not always all on you. Like, it's dependent on a lot of factors, I think. And I think that's what you're saying. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that sounds right. Yeah, I think one way to sort of, if you feel like you might be stuck, one thing you can look at is just your sort of action coefficient. Like whatever the action is, and there's probably jobs are interesting because, man, just seeing a spectrum of like different companies and how they work as a new employee, as kind of a new professional, you don't even really, at least for me, I didn't even have the faintest idea about how the company actually worked, how the business ran. Forget like what the product was or what, but just like why it's that way and how it's evolved. I also didn't care or didn't even cross my mind. But one thing you see is a lot of stuff can happen unintentionally. And then something just works a certain way. And again, it's almost like the same conversation as the scholarships. What does your manager want from you? What does the company want from you? There might be a situation where just because of how it all played out, they have you doing something where you're a quarter as effective or interested or empowered as you could. And that's not because they don't, it could be for some kind of intentional reason, but it could be for no reason at all. It could just be like, well, that's just what we've got. And so I do find that the people that, just get their nose in there and start asking questions, you're going to, it's at least a way to, if you want to swing more towards being in the action, being excited, it's at least an option, no matter what your situation is. You can start making some noise. And obviously, the whole equation changes once you have family and this, that, but early
Yeah.
career, it's like, you cannot fail.
Yeah. That's
There's
a
no
good,
such thing.
sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that's a good point because what I was saying was like earlier was like, I think that the environment has a huge role and it does, but that doesn't mean that you're trapped based on a certain environment. Like there's still, I think what you're saying is there's still things you can do in any environment, which is probably a better approach. Yeah.
The other thing is like, if you imagine you never talk to anyone, you're in an empty room, you're not going to be able to even come up with what to ask, what to be curious about. And that's how I think of my time in these earlier companies. I didn't even have I didn't even get to graduate to, oh, I'm nervous to ask because I didn't even know what there was to ask. It's like all my manager conversations were like, keep doing what you're doing. There was so little to grasp onto to sort of build on. So yeah, I mean, in that vein, where you learn those things has to come from some sort of external source, at least to get your brain thinking, conversations, cast, whatever, some other job that's like, you have no choice but to see those things. So
Yeah. So on that same note, can you walk us through what kind of happened when that you came into this role that you're at now? How did that come to fruition? And then, yeah, just talk us through that. And then I'll get into some more questions with more direction.
yeah, let me pull up a little LinkedIn message because that's kind of
Oh,
where it all began, just so I remember the moment. But so laid off, very generous severance. Like you said, it was early COVID. The company I came from was a very high integrity company, founders that had been successful in past business ventures. And so as far as the spectrum of what I've understood COVID layoffs have looked like, I feel was quite a nice offering. Just for a fun little detail, one of the things they did was, if you're in technology, you might get these equity grants, and they typically come with a 1-year cliff where you have to stay at least a year before you can start to vest these shares. One of the things they did was, no matter how far into your year you were, they prorated it and acted as if they had vested. So I was, fortunately for me, I was right on the cusp of a year, right at 11 months. And so it would have been a little bitter to lose all of that. But fortunately, they didn't do that. But anyway, so got laid off, had a couple months of runway, started to do what I had always been doing. I still didn't really have any dramatic life thesis updates at that point. So started studying software engineering. I think I told myself, hey, if I really commit to interview prep, then I could get a even higher tier job, higher tier company. So because I believed in the fact that if I put in the time, it could be there. And whatever I sort of saw as my shortcomings previously, I thought of as me not trading that time for that qualification. Like I didn't take the very, very hard software class in college. I did something else. I studied abroad, or I did XYZ other thing, which I was happy with that. And I understood the trade-off. So I set back on that grind and I started doing the applications. And I think in my head, I was like, I want to see if I can make this still a stepping stone, probably in salary and maybe company prestige. Cause at that time, that was my understanding of what a good opportunity would look like. And then I also was hoping to if there was a world where I could talk to the users and understand who we were building for a little bit more tangibly, that felt like a better thing. I was loosely starting to think about that. I was also thinking if I could do literally by hours in the day, a little bit less coding and a little bit more of anything else, that would be good. Or I'd be curious to see what that looked like. So I had that lens. And then early COVID, there weren't so many layoffs yet. So there were still some opportunities. I got a LinkedIn message from this guy, and he was basically saying, he was coming at me like a investor. And he was saying, we've created XYZ companies in the past, and we're actually exploring a potential new investment. Let me know if you want to chat. It was just nothing that stand out from my lens in the message, but I just happened to take the chat. And then in that chat, I felt like good percentage of it was spent him understanding me, and very much in this type of conversation, giving me space to kind of express why I felt like I had struggled to really rise or just find my foothold. And he was pitching his thing. And in the end, we just he sort of pitched a contract. So it could be a sort of temporary thing just to buy some time. And what we would be doing was going into trucking. I would sort of be a technical advisor, and we'd be understanding if there was a business to be built in this space. So now I start to see this as, hey, maybe this turns into nothing, but I at least can get paid for a few more months, drag out the search, and it's something different. And something about the conversation with him was man, I have not experienced this level of feeling of understanding of what I'm saying in a professional sense. I felt that emotionally from friends, but not I can guide you and I can so I was that's different. And so I ended up taking a chance on that, although it didn't even really feel like much risk because worst case, it falls back, and then I'm like back where I am. And then what eventually happened with that was we spent the initial months traveling to trucking companies. It ended up also being in the trucking space, which is why he was looking at people involved in the Samsara layoffs, not just me, but probably a couple others of my peers. And I was able to I didn't, there wasn't an expectation for me to single-handedly build a massive product, but it was sort of to be a technical lens in conversations and understand what things meant. And that has a whole evolution but that was the start of my relationship with this company called Toro TMS.
Okay. Wow. I remember now when you were like, because I was still in Michigan, so we would just like hear from you, and you were like, "Yeah, I got this contract role." I feel like this is what I remember, and you're like, "We'll see how it goes. I don't know," but it's really cool to hear you speak about your first conversation with the man. I don't know. Can I say his name?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, with Michael, just knowing after all these years how big of a role he seems to have played in your life. I think, again, this is such valuable, like, information and experience, I think, to there seems to be this sort of trend where you start out, you're young, you're really attracted by the, like, big tech and, like, what they can offer you, and then maybe, like, a shift, like, it's just similar to my path. Shift in, like, what's important to you, like, what you're looking for, not really knowing, like, what you're doing, and it just seems like, that's similar to what happened with you. But anyway, I'm gonna turn my light on because, like, what is happening? Um, you were a software engineer, and then you transitioned into this role. How is it different from a software engineer? And then, like, how has your experience been? Like, it's been 3 years, so, like
Yeah. The, yeah. Being involved from the start of something is one very good way to really care about it and know about it. So seeing this product, which we're now 3 years into building, getting to be there at the milestones, I will never not care about this product. I've put in too much time and experience, so too much, pain and joy and just the full spectrum of emotions. It's like family almost. Like you might resent it or whatever, but there will always be this, it's just a connection to it. Not that I resent anyone in my pretty, but yeah, well, how is the role different? I think it's funny. I look at the culture being there from the start, you are able to radically influence the culture of the company. You are able to sort of be aware of what the most important things are. And so hour by hour compared to a software engineer, I spend the vast majority of my time not doing any kind of coding or that kind of stuff anymore. I do more like talking to users just because of my timing in the company. I'm sort of a conduit of moving information around, helping the different departments understand why things work the way they work, helping them solve problems. So I kind of think of myself as a like company problem solver. And that means that they could be like user problems. They could be like problems with how people are working together. It could be problems with the team being motivated by the vision. So that's one part. And then the other part is helping the team systematically go learn about pains out in the industry, like really intimately, and sort of helping the team solve those problems with our product. So those two like streams are just going all the time. So like any given day, I think about like a day when I'm going up to previous software engineering job, might very well not speak to another person all day. And this one is more talking. But because I've had that earlier experience and because of the people that I've gotten to build this company with, it is not that same way for developers, or at least we're very proactive about opportunities for developers to take on as much context as they have interest in. And so I do feel like, to a certain extent, if I started at Toro as a developer and never moved into product, I probably would be having a much better time as a developer there, just because of kind of the culture of customer centricity. And, nobody is everyone is entitled to information and gets to spend that time talking to the user. So it's different, because at the end of the day, like, you do have a software engineering seat for the purposes of writing software and creating a product. But I think, just given my past, I find my style of product management to be one that's like very developer kind of minded relative to other people who might come from paths that are non-technical.
I thought of two questions while you were speaking. So I think the first one is like, I guess, yeah, the first one is what do you think is like the most, in the interest of time, the most valuable thing that you've learned in this role, in this environment after 3 years? Hard to put it into one thing, and why? Because I still have to ask you about biking and real estate.
I think about the power of candor and clarity. Coming from the Midwest especially, I'm always sensitive to what people are thinking. I want to be liked. I want to be, respected. I don't want to step too much on people's toes and that. But in so many moments, I can see that if you really want to drive change and be a leader, sometimes those things are in conflict. And so I think I've learned that if you really want to be an effective leader, you need to be honest, very much still thoughtful, but you need to be clear, concise, and candid. And so that has been an interesting evolution for me, because I am sort of now at a point where, as an individual contributor, I did very well because I understood things, and I was interested and excited, and I cared, and I was just working and solving problems with my hands. And now it's at a point where, in order to be a really effective leader, you need to develop some new skills. And so that's just sort of the current transformation that I'm experiencing, but certainly not the first. It's just my latest.
Okay. And then on that note, given what you've learned and having all the experiences that you've had, I think you mentioned back when you were like in the beginning of the pandemic and when you ended up accepting this role, you were thinking that if you put in the time to interview, you could get a really high tier job or whatever. And at that point, that might have involved you staying in software engineering. So my question is, what do you think is like the trade-offs to maximizing a job offer, either financially or like status, in an industry that you're already like somewhat comfortable and familiar with, versus maybe taking a risk on something you're like curious about? Like, I think you also mentioned you wanted something where you could like talk to users more and like understand the product more. And like, so those were interests you had. Maybe going for like a high status, high tier job in coding would have meant that you can't necessarily have that. Like, those two aren't always like one and the same. So what do you think are the benefits of taking the route that you took?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, you could sort of cut the line from maybe a compensation standpoint, but you're not really cutting the line from like an ability or learning standpoint. And so it's hard to quantify exactly like what the return on doing it this way is all in. Like, you can look at the financial, but if you look at something that allows you to be 5% more excited day to day, and then you look at the compounding impact of that over years, it's really hard to understand.
Well, I think that's what I mean. Like maybe you had stayed in a role similar to what you had at Pocket Gems and Samsara versus this. How do you
Yeah.
feel, maybe to rephrase that, how do you feel that this has been maybe for the better?
Yeah. I mean, I think of this as if I understood at the time what it was, it would have been an absolute no brainer. The impacts of what this has done on my broader life extend far beyond the job as far as my confidence, how I see the world, how I think about the rest of my life, my energy, and this isn't everyone's situation. I think the issue is like, I was sitting next to people who were actually excited by maybe a software engineering gig or just fit it. And that's incredible. And so it's easy to think like, oh, there's something innate about CS that is that, but I don't even necessarily think that's the case. I think it's just each individual and how they match up with a role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I look at if anything, I still feel like I'm so far from the crank that I could have down. And those are the types of things I think about now, not going back and slowing it down, but how can I keep
Really,
this learning applying in the next
right.
decision? And so I'm still not like at the edge. The trade-offs, there are certainly, it draws on your time. It's higher highs, lower lows. But I've always felt like my life philosophy was more to prefer that style than like a very tapered, flatter
Yeah.
flow.
No, I think just from hearing you talk about all the experiences, depth, and it's not like we have this conversation, like we have snippets of it, but like not all of this together. So it just sounds like at every point you've like done what's in front of you, really gone for it, and then like opportunities have presented themselves, mixed with obviously you're hardworking, disciplined, like, you go out there and get opportunities, but also, like, it's like, it'd be hard to look backward or, like, back then know what your path would have been. Like, to some extent, it sounds like there's only so much planning you can do. That's just what I'm getting. Like,
Yeah,
looking back, all these experiences have contributed to where you are now and everything. So that's just my reflection on all of this.
I totally agree. And I do think that when you really look at it and like you're experiencing the same thing, in my opinion, but it's the power of compounding. I mean, it's hard to overstate rather how powerful it is to continue to push up against the edges of your situation, your understandings, both from an education perspective and from like an action perspective. Eventually, people talk about like, okay, to a certain extent, we can't control luck, but you can control like your surface to experience luck or something like that. And the reality is like, if you're in a city with so much more going on, you have a skill set that is in demand, you have friends who are thinking similarly and challenging things and challenging you, all these things increase the chances. But certainly I think of like positivism. I mean, all these things do a little bit. And yeah, things like this as well.
That's great. That's great advice. Definitely gonna use that
Which,
as a teaser. So I'm so glad we got the majority of the meat of your professional career. I do, however, really want to ask you about two other things. So this real estate endeavor and the cycling. So let's start with real estate, get that going. Real estate. So from my perspective, so is it okay if I like summarize what has occurred so far and then you correct me and so on and so forth?
sure.
Okay. So far you have, along with your partner Rachel, you guys like live the majority of your 20s in California and like doing some digital nomad situation and like living up your life, living it up. And then because you have the familiarity with Michigan and we know that the price of homes is like so egregiously different and it's much more manageable to get into the real estate business. In Michigan, you decided to buy 2 investment homes near where we grew up, one year, one the next. And so you guys have been making the decision, it seems like, to use the resources you have to invest in that for future gains. And now you're living in a new house in Ann Arbor, also renting parts of it to like students. So that's just to summarize. I guess my question is, would you add or correct anything to that? And then, like, since we don't have a lot of time, I guess, what are your goals or ideas around real estate? Yeah.
Yeah. So the initial motivation was multifaceted. I mean, definitely there's the aspect of like passive income. It's, everyone's always like, it's great to have options. It's great to have freedom. And it was just one of these things that we took a step at a time. I think Rachel, my partner, is a great hedge against how conservative and low risk I am, in that she's always willing to go and just try something. And so that, I mean, throughout our relationship, that's been a theme, but especially with this venture. And so I think I was sort of somebody who would really take the time to understand the whole space, and it's easy to slow down and maybe get discouraged. And she was like, yeah, let's go for it. And so I think it just took it a step at a time. Our goals with it, I mean, flexibility, to start, it made sense to be near our hometown because, at some point in the future, maybe it can be flexible. It could be a rental for some time, and then we live there if there's ever that moment. Sell it if something changes. And so it was just something where I looked at it as the next evolution in my financial like journey. It's something that was just interesting. It's like any other problem.
Yeah, it's like a project.
Yeah. And so it didn't happen overnight. I mean, we're probably 2.5, 3 years into this, moving at a pace that makes sustainable sense for our lives. And by no means is it an absolute windfall or anything yet, but it is one of those things where you take a step at a time. And I will say that, like, having a couple reps in, it is something that there's this initial barrier of information. And then once you overcome that, it's not excruciatingly time intensive and painful. It's unique in that way. You have to overcome this initial hurdle. And once you stabilize it, it's much less intensive. So in that way, it fits into life well, because you just need this initial window. And then once you could do that, then it comes back down. It's just happening somewhat passively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. I wish I could get into more detail on that, but I think regardless, it's helpful and it's very interesting. And I'm glad you said that it's gradual and not like all of a sudden, because I think just from an outsider's view, it can be overwhelming to look at what other people have like achieved or own or et cetera, and be like, how did they get there? And so it's just good to like level that with some like realistically, this is what happened. Also, I just think it's so amazing. It's so exciting that you've been able to do that at this age. So yeah, I'm excited to see like what you guys do in the future and what you learn. And honestly, looking forward to like learning from you as I have in many other things.
No, I
Um,
mean, I think appreciate it, right? Rachel and I spend a good amount of time talking about, how we want our lives to look. She's definitely encouraged me to like do more reflection. And I think that's huge because uh, uh, certain types of things don't necessarily happen by accident. You need to like
mhm.
convince yourself that it's what you want to do, and hype each other up. And so, to a certain extent that can be for your career, for your personal life, but it's nice to have some sort of way to slow down, think about what's possible, start to learn how to get there.
Yeah, I love that. I think also it's a really good practice to be like, what do I want? Like, how big can my dreams get? Because no one else is going to ask you. And if you're not thinking about it, it's not going to happen on accident. I mean, maybe, but it definitely helps. And then also, if you're going through challenges with like the real estate or whatever, it's really good to have that crystal clear vision of like, this is why we're doing this. This is why we've done all these things. Like knowing what you want like that to look like in like 10 years or so. But I would love to ask you about biking. So the reason I want to ask you about biking is because A, you love it, and B is because after everything we've spoken about, it's very clear that you lead a very busy life. I think you've turned biking into this thing that you absolutely love. And it wasn't like that from childhood or whatever. I think you found it in your mid 20s. And so I guess I'm curious, what role do you think biking plays in your general wellness? How do you view it? Hobby, something you can like develop skill at on the side, connect with friends with? What is biking to you, since this is the which is all we have time for?
Yeah, sorry I was rambling so much.
No, that is
Works.
not what I meant.
Yes, biking is total game changer. I did not expect to find something like what it's been for me. But what I think, I mean, it's been gradual growth. And I think I'm just continuously testing. I'll do a little more and I'll test to be like, am I still having fun? Am I liking this? And more so than a lot of other things in my life, that answer kept being yes. Um, and I don't know exactly. I've thought a lot about why, because I'm like, man, there's got to be some learning here that I can apply to other things. Because truly, like, you know, I don't have a lot of other things that I can draw back on and say, oh, that was like my relationship with biking. But I have some hunches, and I think it's because it stacks so many of the things I'm looking for in life together in a single experience that I can feel good about that relative putting that much time into it. And, I look at where my relationship is with bike now, and it's something about it does something for my social, my community building, something for my competitiveness, my love for sports and adrenaline. It does something for my health and my energy, you know, entertainment, travel, technical, getting to tinker with something. It feels good and interesting to understand how it works. And I think just the way it existed over time, I was able to sort of say, okay, I'm ready for a little bit more. I'm ready for a little bit more here. I've take a little break here. Okay, I'm going to take a big step forward here. So it had flexibility to fit in with whatever else was going on in my life. And so if I look at like my whole journey, I maybe had a spike in the first year, and then I think I tore my ACL, didn't think about it. It was part of my rehab. Then I started to meet some people in the Bay. I started to be a way to connect with our brother remote from afar. Then it started to be something I was competitive at, and I liked that aspect. And so there just keeps being little, kind of add-ons to it. And I've spent a lot of money on it, and I put a lot of time into it, but I don't regret any of that. If anything, I'm still like, how can we feed this a little bit more?
Yeah.
Um,
It's like that question, what do you spend too much money on and what will you continue to spend too much money on?
yeah, exactly. 100%. I sometimes lately I've been trying to corral my finances a little bit. I have a biking category, but it never feels right to try and be too restrictive with that category.
I love that. I love that so much for you. Like it's been such a consistent thing. And it's just nice to see you so passionate about that thing outside of work. That's really cool. So, well, that's all we have time for today. I'm sorry we went over time. I know it's late for you, but I think that was such a beautiful conversation. I'm so grateful to have a brother like you that I can have this conversation with. And I'm just like so grateful for all the things. Like, I feel like as I get older, I realize like how much of an impact like you and Dan had on me in a positive way, and like all the things you taught me indirectly, and like all the security I had knowing that you guys like had your stuff figured out. So yeah, I'm grateful for your time as well tonight. I know you're really busy. So thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you for having me and love you. It is never a situation that we have anything figured out. We're just all trying to take it as we go. But I really appreciate everything you're doing with this podcast, and it's so inspiring to kind of get to observe your journey. So very proud of you, happy for you, and thanks for the chats.
Oh, so cute. Okay.